Low Fuel Motorsports Assetto Corsa Competitione's community developed online ranked racing system. How does it compare to doing iRacing, and is it any good? That is what I'm going to talk about in this video. Now, before I delve into this battle of the simulators or online platforms, I just want to thank everybody that's supported the channel by subscribing and liking and following us on Twitch for our live streams, and also everybody that has used our Amazon affiliate links and our Fanatec affiliate links when buying crazy simulation hardware. Really appreciate being able to do what I do here. Thanks to you for making it happen. So, in the background, I am playing a recording of the previous race that we did, which was the Coach Dave GT3 sprint race at Silverstone. This one, of course, taking place at night, or just a very cloudy day. It's hard to tell in the UK. Now, with LFM, somewhat like iRacing, there are races every single hour, and those races have multiple splits, putting you with people of a similar low skill level as yourself. When you start out on Low Fuel Motorsport, you'll only be able to join the rookie races, but once you've done enough of them, you'll have a ranking and a rating, allowing you to then join the proper races, which each hour you have a 25-minute race. Every 2 hours there's a 45-minute race option, and there's also some other races that take place on a weekly basis, and there's also special events that take place, all of which put you into splits based off your skill and your safety rating from your previous races. So very similar in many ways to iRacing if you were just doing GT3 racing. Now, it's also worth saying that the tracks typically stick around for a week, so you've got a whole week to drive that same track, learn all the corners, get better at it before it changes to a new track. Nicely, the 45-minute and the 25-minute races, as well as the special events, often take place on different circuits, so you can mix things up a bit rather than getting completely brain destroyed by the monotony of driving only one track for an entire week. Now, with LFM being a community project, it is completely free to access. Well, you need to own Assetto Corsa Competizione and the DLC if they happen to be running one of the DLC tracks, but other than that, it's a completely free online system. So that gives you a general overview of what LFM is, but the real question is LFM any good, and how does it compare to iRacing? Well, you'll be glad to know, well, I mean, it depends what sim you're a fan of and how much of a fanboy you are, but if you're a fan of ACC, you'll be glad to know that Low Fuel Motorsport, in my opinion, is absolutely bloody fantastic, and in many ways offers better racing than what you'll find on the iRacing service. Now, I'm going to have to clarify these controversial statements, especially for the iRacing fanboys that are now smashing their keyboards against their foreheads, and go into a bit more depth to explain how I've reached this conclusion. So the first thing that's worth saying is that despite iRacing, as we all know, having the best, most detailed, most advanced, and totally worth the cost of access Netcode and multiplayer servers, despite that fact, ACC actually does the online networking better than iRacing. Now, ACC's not perfect. Cars pinball off each other if you knock into them, especially if a car's already at load, they go flying off the track. ACC does not have the best netcode of all the sims. I think Race Room actually probably does the best netcode in terms of enabling realistic, relatively physical, real-world racing. But compared to iRacing, the netcode in ACC is far less frustrating. Crucially, one of the things that iRacing does to make the cars look like they're moving smoother and to make things visually look more realistic is that iRacing has a lot of smoothing, resulting in a lot of invisible car contacts and just really weird online behaviour. If you're watching a replay, you might not notice it, but when you drive iRacing a lot, and I'm ashamed to say I've wasted a lot of my time playing iRacing, I do actually enjoy iRacing, but when you play it a lot, in order to do well online and to enjoy it, you really have to understand its magical netcode. For example, if you're going around a tight corner at high speed, that tends to introduce situations where the car on the inside invisibly contacts you despite being over a metre away. Or if you're going into a hard braking zone, you really have to understand what it looks like in the rearview mirror for the car that's behind you if they've broke a bit later and if they're making a pass. You kind of have to learn the reality that's happening behind the scenes as opposed to what you're really seeing in your mirror. Sometimes you don't have to react even though it looks as if they're going to punt you, and other times you need to react to avoid a contact when it doesn't look like they were going to hit you at all. These are things you sort of learn over time playing iRacing, but it's very frustrating and very annoying and really counterintuitive if you're starting out on iRacing and you're not particularly experienced with it. As I say, the only really counterintuitive components of ACC's netcode is the way the cars react to being tapped when the car is already at load through a corner. So you'll get people having a very gentle contact and that will cause a car to rotate and get stuck in some kind of flat slide, which is very frustrating, but no worse really than if you have a slight tap in iRacing where cars also bounce off each other. And also in ACC, if someone's got a higher ping, you will see a degree of rowboating because ACC doesn't have as much smoothing as iRacing, so visually it looks worse, but that actually gives you a clue that they're lagging a bit and you need to give them more space, and if you don't hit them, nothing will happen. Whereas in iRacing, there are literally 1 metre apart, sometimes more, where you're literally Jedi forced off the circuit, which is really, really annoying. Now it's probably also a good time to mention the quality of racing, and I think the thing is with online racing, a lot of the quality of racing, I need to like TM this, is not necessarily down to the drivers, but again also down to the simulator. So from my experience, the quality of drivers within ACC and iRacing are actually very comparable. My I rating normally hovers between 2,600 and 3,500, depending on if I'm driving the i04, which is a car I'm alright in and I enjoy, or if I'm driving fixed Ferrari, which is a car I load up just as a form of masochism. But at my rating in iRacing, I'm normally in the top split for a lot of races. In GT3, actually, I'm normally in the top split or second split, but in most series, I'm in the top split. So that lets me see the cream of the crop, of the top, the best. Not really the best, but you know, I mean, the top average players of iRacing, people that have wasted too much time on iRacing. And in low fuel motorsports, from my experience of playing it so far, it's very comparable. The actual driver quality is very comparable in terms of moves, race start mistakes, you know, the general stuff, the type of things that people do. It's very, very similar. However, what I did notice straight away, even in the rookie races, when getting up to the rank to do the iron races, I did notice that people locked up or did lock-up mistakes and outright ploughing into the field mistakes a lot less in ACC than they do in iRacing. Also, generally speaking, I'd say the side-by-side racing and side-by-side moves in ACC, despite the tendency for cars to go flying off from a contact, generally ended up being cleaner and more consistent than what I found in iRacing. And I don't think this is because of the drivers, I think this is because of the actual simulator's technology, and I think fundamentally a lot of it is down to the tyre models and the physics of the simulators. So in iRacing, what I would say is one of the biggest issues with its physics is it's very, very easy to lock up in iRacing. And even if you've got cars with ABS, which GT3 cars do, it's still very easy to just plough on straight ahead. It's also way easier in iRacing, and I think unrealistically, but we'll put that to another side, it's way easier in iRacing to just get into humongous slides, be that a lateral slide or, you know, straight, as I said, ploughing on straight ahead. It's just very easy to get the tyres in a state where the car is just sliding out of control, inevitably making people accidentally knock into the car that's next to them or bang into the car in front of them, causing knock-on effects. In ACC, in my opinion, I think its tyres are far more realistic, especially in regards to how the ABS operates, how the traction control operates, but just in terms of the return of the grip. Once you get into a slide, it's a lot harder to actually get the cars into a big slide, and if you do get into a slight slide whilst driving normally, the grip returns pretty quickly. You also have much more control of the car when it's already in quite an aggressive slide in Assetto Corsa Competizione, something that you just don't have to the same extent in iRacing. And in iRacing, when you start sliding, the more you try and get out of it, if you brake more, if you turn more, whatever you do, it always seems to add to the slide. Whereas in ACC, you still have a degree of control, unless you really mess things up. You still generally have a degree of control. The tyres don't just turn off, if you will. Now, I will say the one thing that iRacing does beat ACC for in terms of that car control and issues that I think are caused by the physics that impact the racing, ACC's curbs, especially large curbs and bumps, seem to still be quite problematic and do cause people to lose the car on corners from going over curbs a bit too aggressively. Way more than happens in iRacing. I think iRacing actually does suspension really, really well. But in ACC, you see a lot of accidents are caused by cars taking a bit too much curbing and then the car just going absolutely mental. Lastly, I also think with ACC, despite it being a lot easier to drive than iRacing, or a lot more forgiving in many ways, what does cause, I think, quite a few spins in ACC is the lack of force feedback detail in the simulator. Specifically, it's a very aggressive self-aligning force feedback, which definitely helps you catch the rear of the vehicle, which a lot of new drivers struggle with. And ACC has fantastic vibration for if you're locking up once you've already locked up and if you're pushing the fronts too much, and track details, which is really great for new drivers, and it's a very immersive feeling. But specifically, the dynamicism of the force feedback and the variation in force feedback strength for mid-corner and how much grip you have on the front tyres, your exact feel of where the tyres are at the limit, that is really, really bad in ACC. It's possibly, in fact I would say it is the worst simulator for describing the current state of the tyres through the force feedback. Even iRacing, which I think has pretty bad force feedback or largely uninformative force feedback, does this better. And if you want a comparison, you can load up the original Assetto Corsa, which is incredible for this type of tyre information. R Factor 2, Race Room, Automobilista 2, they're just on another level for telling you how much grip you have and what the car's likely to do, the weight of the vehicle, in subtle ways, so you can drive preemptively, and so you can avoid overdriving and you can avoid a lot of spins. In ACC, it's so abrupt, it's so lacking that detail, and when the track changes from when the tyres start to go off towards the end of even these shorter races, or if the track changes from dry to getting slightly damp, you just see so many people just losing it all the time. And I definitely think if the force feedback was more detailed, that would really help reduce those situations. Of course, I now have an AccuForce wheel, and I'm generating my own force feedback from telemetry, which is allowing me to feel what the car is doing a lot better. So I'm basically cheating to win. iRacing, its force feedback, not particularly good either for this kind of detail, braking feel, all those subtle, the tyre grip, but it's definitely much better than ACC. But in totality, when it comes to ACC versus iRacing, when you consider everything, the racing online with low fuel motorsport ends up being better quality for the most part, and more compelling and more enjoyable. I don't have a absolute panic attack when I'm side by side with a car in ACC, despite me being far more familiar with iRacing. I can just focus on enjoying the driving more and enjoying battling another driver and trying to catch up with them and where to make a move and all those components. iRacing is just so unrealistically stressful with that. Maybe that's more realistic though, but maybe we need more stress. But you know, it feels artificially stressful in iRacing compared to ACC. So yeah, I mean that's pretty incredible considering that low fuel motorsports is completely free. I don't know how they've done it, because we know that iRacing have to pay so much for their service, which is why the iRacing service costs so much to access. Now, it is worth also mentioning aspects such as the graphics. Obviously, ACC has day-night, rain, you know, much more advanced graphics engine with the Unreal Engine. However, iRacing runs a lot better on lower end systems, and in my opinion iRacing actually looks absolutely fantastic, though obviously it's just day to night, no weather or anything. If you've got a fast computer it won't be an issue with ACC, but if you play in VR, or you particularly like a very crisp image, or you have really nice triple screens and you want to run really high frame rates, then that performance aspect of ACC, which this is no fault of LFM obviously, but that performance aspect really does hold back ACC compared to iRacing. And just the raw frame timing and the subtle stuff is a lot worse in ACC compared to iRacing. Also worth saying, stuff like the onboard camera, how it filters the movements, all those like really subtle things, iRacing really nails, and I don't think gets enough credit for. But if you can look past all that, ACC's perfectly workable for many people, and again, fantastic value for money. Now, as this isn't really a review of ACC versus iRacing, it's more online service, LFM, with ACC versus iRacing. I don't want to go too crazy in depth comparing the qualities of the sims. I just wanted to mention those main ones that really pertain to how they affect online racing and the usability of the sims. So lastly, in terms of the technical aspects of the sims, or the actual gameplay rule set of the sims, as we see a car on its sideways there, it's definitely worth pointing out that ACC does damage, in my opinion, a lot better than iRacing. Now, with the cars that support it, iRacing has much better visual damage, and even with the GT3 cars, I think iRacing's visual damage is better than ACC in general. However, in terms of how the damage is got from accidents or people hitting into you or hitting parts of the track, and how that damage then affects the vehicle and slows down your performance, pretty much universally in iRacing it's inconsistent, it's a total dice roll, and it's generally on the overly punishing side and just feels arbitrarily punishing. Whereas with ACC it's more on the forgiving side, and I think the cars are actually, in some ways it's more realistic in that the cars sometimes can take quite a bit big hits, and you'll keep going without issue. Definitely ACC is on the more forgiving side, but when you consider the variability of netcode and the randomness of online racing, that just produces more compelling online racing and a much less frustrating online racing. I think unless damage can be done very, very realistically, it's better for it to be arbitrarily forgiving than arbitrarily unforgiving. And I can tell you the amount of times I've had absolute multiple races just ruined one after each other in iRacing due to some inconsequential tap, and then it's as if I'd run into an elephant or something. Whereas in ACC you really do have to be very badly punted or very unlucky to have completely race-ending damage. It also doesn't just bake in an arbitrary steering rotation from contacts like it does in iRacing. So yeah, ACC's absolutely nailing it, and really beating up iRacing here. I'm sorry iRacing, but you're taking the punches. So in iRacing's credit though, credit where credit's due, iRacing does really beat out low fuel motorsports and ACC with one crucial feature, probably one of the best features in all of sim racing, and that is voice chat. Now, some of you hate voice chat, and you know that's fine. There's a mute button. I know that this blows people's minds. If you don't like voice chat, you can mute it. Sorted, you're happy. But for those of us that love live streaming and effectively sim race mostly for the salt mining and get most of our live stream entertainment value from being shouted at from people all over the world, or just listening to people scream at each other in different languages, the fact that ACC doesn't have voice chat is a real shame. Maybe Low Fuel Motorsports could fix that with some kind of Discord integration or something. Who knows? Just that would be cream on top of the coffee. But yeah, unfortunately that's not part of ACC. But that pretty much covers all the major technical differences there pertinent to online racing. Now, one of the most important things, and I probably should have said this at the start of the video, but I don't know how to make videos. I've only been doing this for like a decade. I'm still learning. But one of the most important things is, of course, user numbers. And it's quite surprising how popular Low Fuel Motorsport has been, and how many people are playing it. And you'll be glad to know you can pretty much find at least a full split, if not near enough a full split, so a 15 plus car race at any time of the day. Most of the time of the day you can actually get multiple split racing. At peak times you can find yourself with 4, 5 plus splits, which is absolutely fantastic. And Low Fuel Motorsports is really the first simulator outside of iRacing to offer multi-split ranked racing at any time of the day. Obviously Gran Turismo has it, but you know, that's a different thing. That's a whole different thing. We don't talk about that. So really impressive from Low Fuel Motorsports to have that activity there, meaning that you can load it up and you can get a race whenever you want. Now, I'd even go so far as to say I think it might, at peak times, European times, have more people in it doing GT3 than iRacing. It seems like that has happened occasionally. Of course, though, overall, iRacing definitely has way more users just driving all the different content in iRacing than obviously Low Fuel Motorsport has. But it really goes to show you the power of the disease that is GT3 racing. And really great, as I say, to see a non-iRacing system with ranking that's active all the time. I know it's active all the time because I did try races at 3 AM, 2 AM, 6 PM, midday, because I have no sleep pattern at all. You'll know this if you watch us on Twitch. You'll have seen us playing at completely mental times. So all said and done, as I said earlier in the video, I think Low Fuel Motorsport has absolutely triple suplexed iRacing and really embarrassed the iRacing service, especially given that it's totally free. I myself obviously am a huge fan of ranked racing, and I think with sim racing it adds so much to the simulators, and with any game, to be honest, if you have something outside of the game that you're currently playing to track your progress. So in Low Fuel Motorsport and iRacing, it's having that ranking to see if you're getting better or getting worse, or that you're staying terrible, as well as the safety rating to show that you're driving nice and clean, or that you need to calm things down, or that you could indeed be more aggressive. It adds another dynamic to sim racing that just makes it much more compelling. So great stuff, absolutely great stuff. And definitely though, if you were really passionate about GT3 cars, you would be an idiot not to do Low Fuel Motorsport with ACC. If you're on a budget as well, obviously Low Fuel Motorsport is going to cost you a lot less than iRacing. iRacing, you're typically looking at around £250 to £300 a year until you've got more content, and then it goes down to around about £100 a year. Whereas Assetto Corsa Competizione, you on Black Friday sales, you could probably get everything, including all the DLC, for under £60. And without the DLC, you can get it for a lot less. So really no excuse if you're a GT3 degenerate. For me, what's held me back from playing it is, of course, ACC's force feedback. I just can't bear it. It's a real sticking point. At least until I got an AccuForce wheel, which, as I say, allows me to generate my own force feedback from the game's telemetry, which then allows me to get the simulator much closer to other simulators in terms of that detail and dynamic detail, as opposed to being hostage to Kunos's very bland, over-the-top self-aligning force feedback. Now, you might like it, so it's not a problem for you. You might like the core force feedback with whatever wheel you have, but for me that was a real sticking point. Maybe, who knows, Kunos are never going to change it apparently, so maybe AC2 will be different, but if you can look past that and you can look past the other aspects, then ACC is absolutely fantastic. I think a lot of people also really can enjoy iRacing as well. So, you know, at the end of the day, the more options, the better it is. The more sims there are to play. If there's a sticking point for you with a specific sim, you've got something else to play, and it's really good just to have more options. So, absolute standing applause, topless standing applause, I would say, to Low Fuel Motorsport. I think they're supported by donations. It's, you know, you don't have to pay for it, so I'd recommend, if you use it, to donate, send them underwear in the post, you know, whatever it takes to let them continue doing what they're doing. I'd love to see them support some other simulators, but of course that's got a risk of diluting the user base. Yes, there you go. I think ACC Low Fuel Motorsport has beaten iRacing at GT3. This was a fantastic race I had at night. You too can have fantastic races if you play it as well. There's nothing else left to say other than to click the like button, subscribe, and leave disgruntled comments in the comments section. I'm hoping for some salty iRacers. Maybe wait until I'm in a race with you and then shout at me over voice chat so I can make an audio clip out of it. That'd be perfect. But until the next one, guys, thank you very much for watching. Happy tea drinking, and goodbye.